Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Sophia Saeed. I'm so glad that we all are here again together. Thank you for joining me. As always, I want to start this meeting with a prayer, and I'll tell you the agenda of today's meeting right after that. Today, I want to use this poem by Saint Francis of Assisi as our morning prayer, and the name of the poem is Anyone Who Suffered. And it goes like this: I would not leave this earth until God promised me. I would not leave this earth until God promised me that my hands could always touch the face of anyone who suffered. So I thought we'll start with this because we are all in the process and the journey of providing healing to those who have suffered and who are suffering, and I appreciate it greatly. So the way these calls will go now, we won't have formal presentations like last time, which went wonderfully, and you all have the video of it, so please go back and look at it. We tried to cover a lot of the grounds, but a few things were left, and I want to cover those few things about communication and gender relations, and then I want to leave the next 40 minutes open. I'll do that in first 20 minutes with Ibad, and then I'm going to leave the rest of the time open for Q&A. I think our calls will become a lot more meaningful once your families start arriving. I know that we all have already got started getting allocations, but nobody has arrived yet. So before we start, let me first do the introductions. My name is Sophia Saeed. I'm the executive director of the Interfaith Center. Our mission is to reduce the fear and hatred among world religions. And we are so grateful for this opportunity from Catholic Charities to help them, assist them in serving the Afghan refugees. I also serve as the chair of Medina Institute and Mosque, and that is the second hat I wear in this project, that we also are receiving a sponsor team. So we're working on our team as well as providing resources to you all when it comes to Afghan culture. Thank you all for joining. I want to actually, before I start, I want to ask Ibad to introduce himself. And because he will be joining me for the next 4 weeks, and I think he'll be a very important resource for us, depending on all the questions that we get. So, Ibad, would you take a minute or two or more, maybe 3, 4 minutes, to tell us a little bit about you so the team knows who you are and where you come from?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me into your space. My name is Ibadullah Ibadi, and I was born and raised in Arlington, Virginia, where I currently live and have grown up right outside of Washington, D.C. I went to school at George Mason University and graduated in 2015 with a degree in government and international politics. And growing up, I've always been kind of influenced by Afghan culture. My parents are very cultured and they are very proud of their Afghan identity. So they've really raised me to feel and believe the same way. And it was at Mason when I became involved with the Afghan Student Union and realized just how many Afghan Americans are in the Northern Virginia area. So um, I ended up graduating in 2015 with a degree in government and international politics and have been involved with various organizations. I currently work at Capitol Hill as a policy assistant with the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, doing research on climate policy. But outside of work, I believe, like Sophia said, some of the hats I wear are serving with the Afghan American Community Organization, which is a nonprofit organization which serves to create a more empowered and civically engaged and community-minded Afghan American community all across the United States. And locally in Northern Virginia, I've been in my spare time helping with Afghans who are newly arriving at Quantico Marine Base in Quantico, Virginia. I've been working at the clinic there, kind of helping translate and serve with the doctors and the nurses who are providing care to a lot of the refugees who've been arriving. And secondly, working with various organizations that have been collecting um, goods, items, food, clothing, hygiene kits in order to help get them to the refugees who need them the most and who have been arriving here with little to nothing, with themselves. So thank you so much for listening to that. I hope that was a good introduction. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. We know you're Afghan. I was a little concerned in the beginning. So when my friends told me about Ibad, I'm like, Ibad is probably like my kids, born and raised here, know nothing about the Afghan culture. I need somebody who was raised in Afghanistan. And then my dear friend from Afghanistan told me, no, 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 Sophia, you have to talk to him. He's more Afghani than we are. And I had a good conversation with Ibad, and I'm like, oh my God, wonderful resource. He would be wonderful for us. So I'm going to, the way it's going to work, Ibad, is I'm going to cover a few things, and then it's primarily Q&A. So I'm going to leave you spotlighted with me so you can assist me with what I'm saying. And others, if you can just keep your computers and phones muted for the first 15 minutes, and then we'll go on to all of you. So last time we covered a lot of, with Nagina, we covered a lot of trauma and the context of where they're coming from, how they're coming from. I think we did a very good basics on Afghan religion and culture both. But if you have any questions on religion, please feel free to ask today. Again, we did talk about all the 5 prayers, the needs for ritual abolition, wudu. We also talked about keeping Friday open for them as their holy days. I will remind you that we talked about prayer mats, prayer beads, dress codes, and Qurans, and all of those will be provided to you by Medina. So we are getting those packages ready. We also talked about halal meat and kosher meat, the need to make sure that when you buy groceries for them, only go to the grocery stores that are given to you in the document by Rebecca, because they eat only meat cut and slaughtered in a certain form, which is an Islamic way of slaughtering meat. And similarly, to avoid alcohol and pork in any of the ingredients as you buy them. Okay, so going on today, we want to talk more about communications. We started a little bit on communications, but we didn't cover it. And I want to talk both communications and gender relations together because they're very much interrelated, and communication changes depending on who you are talking and what gender they are in. So we'll cover both of them together, and where I'm missing something, Ibad will pitch in. So reminding you that Afghans are very strong family units, and the family is the base which provides Afghanis with their identity, with their security, and with their social organization. So its family unit is really, really important in Afghanistan. Father is the head of the household, but mother is the head of the family. Father takes care of making money, whereas mother takes care of homemaking, and she takes a lot of pride in providing food for the family. So please make sure when you're planning grocery trips, you talk to the woman in the family and you take her. Which takes me to the point that when we are driving Afghan family members, and a lot of you will be driving one or two at the same time because they're large families, they won't fit in the car. Please make sure you assign the driver based on who you're taking out. So if you're taking father of the family or male members outside, please assign a male driver. And when you're taking female members out or the mother of the family out, please assign a female driver. So another thing about families is that families are kept really strictly private in Afghanistan, like in Pakistan too, which I shared a little bit. And people are often reluctant to share the personal details about the family with non-family members. And not only personal details, but also the knowledge of family struggles is also sometimes kept very private, because the concept is that the more you share your struggles, it can bring shame on the household. Women are more likely to open up to other women about their personal lives, but usually family matters are kept within the family. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk about domestic violence today. But before that, I still want to do communications and do's and don'ts, which we missed last time. One thing which Nagina touched on last time is because of the experiences that these Afghans might have endured, there might be a high occurrence of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress. So we want to be careful about any of those red flags or signs in a child in the family, in an adult in the family. If you see something which is not normal, kids who are unkept, somebody is very withdrawn, so please make sure you talk to your caseworker about it. Don't try to resolve it on your own. Talk to your caseworker about it. It's important. I think I said it last time that try to avoid the topics of culture and religion and ethnic tensions and gender relations with Afghans. Do not assume that they all follow one same conservative interpretation of Islam. It's quite possible that every Afghan has a different position on how they view their religion and how they practice their religion. So it's really important that we respect that and avoid mentioning of any of these political, religious, or gender related topics, because they might be very, very sensitive to many Afghans who are just coming out of that. Um, so, coming on the communication, Ibad, did you say something?
Oh, no, no. I was just listening. I'm
Okay.
good.
So, coming to the topic of communication, I I'm going to start with one thing which I said last time too. Again, if you're a man, always wait for an Afghan woman to initiate the conversation or a handshake, and do not, because they come from a very strictly gender segregated society. And if you're a woman and you're talking to Afghan male, you always wait for him to initiate the handshake or the conversation. It is quite possible that if you're standing with a group of Afghans and there's a male Afghan, he is talking when he's talking to your group, he prefer to talk to the male instead of the female. And do not be offended, don't feel disrespected. It's just probably a part of the culture, or he's more comfortable talking to a man instead of talking to somebody of his own gender than talking to somebody of the other gender. Same goes with women too. If they are with a larger group of Americans, women will probably prefer to talk to another woman. Another thing to remember is dressing modestly around them, because they come from a very, very conservative culture and more used to modest dressing. Me and Rebecca was talking, and she showed me a picture of her headscarf that she's going to wear when she's going to go to receive them at the airport. I'm not saying you all do that, but I think just dressing modestly in the beginning is a good idea as we acclimate our guests to the new US culture. So, starting from a modest dress code. What else? Yeah, going back to communication, Afghans communicate with verbal as well as non-verbal communication tools, both of them. And they're both very, very important. A lot of communication is indirect instead of direct communication. Nagina last week talked about saying no 3 times before saying yes. Really important. That's a good example of how complicated the communication is. Blessings are used a lot in Afghan culture. So if somebody want to say thank you to you, they might use a religious blessing instead of saying thank you. A good example of non-verbal communication is the use of hands. In Afghan culture, there is a separation between the function of hands. Left hand is generally used for hygienic purposes, whereas right hand is considered more clean and it's used more for waving, shaking hands, eating, or offering items to others. So Afghans would always use the right hand to offer you stuff or touch things instead of left hand, which is considered unclean. Eye contact is a thing which I really want to talk about, and I'm going to rely on Ebad's too after this. But I'll share an example from my life after I talk about eye contact. There's a huge difference between Eastern and Western cultures when it comes to eye contact. In America, we really like eye contact. We prefer eye contact. It shows that the other person is giving you attention and enough respect that they're looking at you with your eyes. Whereas in Afghan culture and many Eastern cultures, people would lower their gaze as a sign of respect. and they would avoid sustained eye contact, especially with people of opposite gender. Similarly, young people will always lower their gaze when they're talking to their elders because this is considered respectful and observant of a differential in status. However, if you're talking to the people of the similar gender or status, then direct eye contact is expected and done. So, when this might make sense, when I was raising my two young kids who are not young anymore, uh, I never expected them to look at me in my eyes when I was talking to them. But they were also living in America and they were getting a lot from the outside culture. So I still remember that if I would be upset at my child and I'm talking to them or disciplining them and they're looking at me in my eyes, I would tell them, son, look down, do not ever look at me in my eyes, because it I would be offended so much that how dare he would look at me in my eyes, and my kids would always look down. So I raised them with my culture, looking down when the parents are talking to you. And then time passed, and it's been decades since I've been here, and I changed and I got accustomed to US culture. And now sometimes when I'm talking to my kids and they're looking down, and they're adults, both of them, it annoys me like crazy. And I'm like, look at me in my eyes. Don't you know I'm talking to you? So the culture in our house has switched as I have adapted to US culture. And I think I confuse my kids all the time because sometimes I expect them to look down when I'm upset at them. And other times I want them to look in my eyes because I want them to show me that they're listening to me and giving me attention. So, anyways, that's a good example of a confused culture household, which I think our household is very much hybrid. But this is important for you all to know that, for example, if you're talking to an Afghan woman and you're a male, or if you're a woman and you're talking to an Afghan man and you're looking at them, staring at them in the eye, that might make them very uncomfortable initially. Um, and so and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more when I ask about to pitch in. So a couple of other points before we go on. So physical contact, similarly, it's inappropriate to be physically affectionate with any person of the opposite gender outside your household. So the conversation needs to be very proper. There cannot be any initial handshake or hugs or arm on the shoulder. It's normal to keep a good arm's length distance. I mean, it's normal for women to touch each other and men to touch each other, but other than that, a personal physical space is really, really important. And they would generally, Afghans would give people of opposite gender a respectful amount of personal space. Some of the gestures which are very different in Afghan culture, and here one of them is this thumbs up gesture, which is used in our culture a lot. We use that in social media a lot. Generally speaking, also, I mean, it basically means okay or well done or something like that. I think okay maybe, but it's not considered a good gesture in Afghanistan. Actually, it's very similar to giving somebody a middle finger, or not similar. It has the same connotation. So this is not considered a good gesture in Afghan culture. So please avoid that. Winking is definitely not considered. We use winking in our jokes a lot, but it's not considered appropriate to wink at somebody of an opposite gender. A man would be highly offended or angry if they saw a woman relative being winked at like that. Another thing which I was thinking is nodding, like nodding your head. Please know that nodding may not necessarily indicate that an individual understands or agrees with what you are saying. An Afghan very well may be nodding out of politeness. So if you're doing your initial orientations or trainings with them, please follow up with crucial information or questions so they can show you that they're understanding what you're saying. And do not rely only on nodding, because that could be really a sign of their being polite. because you're speaking to them and they're receiving the communication. It doesn't mean that, okay, understood, and I'll do it. So do follow up questions with them as you're talking to them. Um, a couple of things I want to mention, not a couple of, just one thing before we open it up to Ibad and you all, which is again going back to gender roles. So there is very big difference between gender roles in Afghanistan and in America. Like I said, men are income earners, women are homemakers. Men carry the burden of the family, single handedly supporting the entire household. That's true for husbands, fathers, brothers, cousins, all of them. And women are largely in charge of domestic chores, raising the kids, hospitality, food, entertaining, all of that. There is a very strict public separation of genders, which is actually also legally enforced in many areas. Mixing of males and females only happens within close families or very closely knit village or friend circles. And even if you look at professional circles or educated circles, both where both male and female can be employed or taught together, people are still very cautious to maintain a physical distance from other genders. Now, having said that, when somebody is coming from this kind of gender segregated society, then they are not accustomed to, for example, men, they are not accustomed to being around women. And then they also do not know how, if they are around women, then they don't know how to behave with women because they have never done that. They've never been there and done that. And this is something which needs to be gently taught to, maybe gently taught to some of these men. The concepts of gender equality are very different in US. And there is absolutely no tolerance for any kind of sexual misconduct or inappropriate behaviors. We all know that. So, since these Afghans are coming from a society where they do not know the appropriate and inappropriate sexual conduct in US, I think it's really important that before we expect from them to behave appropriately, we teach them how to behave appropriately. And I was having a discussion with the caseworkers, Rebecca primarily, and we decided that as Afghans are going to get an orientation from you all your teams are going to get that orientation about the US lifestyle and the appliances and how to live in a US household. We also want to give them another cultural adaptation orientation. Just like you all are working hard and you have read a lot of literature, you're attending workshops. I know you have another one scheduled in October on the psychological training. We also want to train our Afghan brothers and sisters, our guests, on how different US culture is and what are the expectations here on their behavior with the opposite gender. And for that, I have requested two of our members, community members from Medina, and the Imam, who are working on that training module. And they are happy and willing to meet with each of the case as they come in, each of the Afghan family as they come in within hopefully first or second day, depending on how the caseworker, which will be Rebecca or Jennifer, tell us. And our Imam and our two gentlemen from the mosque, and hopefully with me as well, they will be giving that training to the newly Afghan families about the appropriate behavior with opposite genders in US, the concepts of gender equality within US, and also teaching them the lack of tolerance for any inappropriate sexual behavior and also any inappropriate physical behaviors. Last time Nagina talked about the way sometimes we deal with children in our cultures is very different from how kids are dealt here. I mean, spanking a child or hitting a child is considered very normal in Eastern cultures. And here also, I mean, you can maybe lightly slap or touch a child, but you can't violently hit a child. And recently, there have been incidents in which an Afghan family might not know that, and they would give a severe beating to a child, or an Afghan man have beaten his wife. And these things are very different in Afghanistan, because culturally you might be able to get away with that because it's very much uh, accepted in the culture, but not in US. So it's really important that we have these conversations with our families early on, as soon as they arrive, that what is a proper contact with women, including their wives and daughters, and the women who are not their wives and daughters, and what things are considered sexual misconduct and sexual misbehavior, because and what is the level of intolerance around it, and if something like that happens, and what are the consequences of that. So you don't have the burden of that training. Our imam and two community members are working on that, and they will provide that training. But I want you to know that your team lead will be scheduling that training through the caseworker, and will be coming and providing it to the Afghan family. So, anyways, these are some of the things which I could not cover last time about communication and gender relations. So, I wanted to go over them briefly. And now I'm going to give it to Ibad to see if I missed something. Ibad can cover it, and then we'll open up to you all as you have any questions.
Sophia, you did a wonderful job, a very great job, and I'm appreciative of that. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you all for being here and being so inclined to, share a Saturday morning, learning more about how we can best help the newly arriving Afghans. There's just a few things that I did want to just add on very quickly. When you talk about communicating with the same gender, and eye contact, I think it's very important to know that it's usually not as a sign of that you're a woman, so I don't care about what you have to say, or you're a man, so this doesn't concern you. It's more so about respect, right? And they come from cultures where men grow up around each other and the women grow up around each other, and there's this shared bond about experiences and all of these things. So when men are speaking, they'll usually speak to themselves or with other men as a sign of respect, and not because communicating with a woman who is not a part of your immediate family or close circle is seen as very disrespectful. It's seen as kind of like very something eye-opening, like why are they doing that? And the same goes for women. So when they do communicate with men, or when women communicate with other women, it's more so as a sign of familiarity than as a sign of respect. Not to, like Sophia said, not for you to be kind of hurt or upset as to why you're not getting proper attention, or not being spoken to. And I think with time that will change, especially as people become more accustomed to U.S. Culture and habits. These are things that will slowly drift and be changed, as I'm sure you'll be noticing. Secondly, I wanted to touch upon the what Sophia said as the no three times and then yes to seem polite. In Dari, we call that like ta'arufing. So that's usually when, like, for example, right, growing up, after school, I went to my friend Kyle's house. Kyle was like, "Hey, Badala, do you want a popsicle?" And I was like, "No, it's okay. Don't worry about it." And he was like, "Okay." And then he got out a popsicle for himself and ate it. And in my head, I was like, "Damn, I actually really would like a popsicle." But I'm just so used to saying no, because you don't want to be seen as impolite, right? You don't want to be seen as asking for things or that type of a thing. Um, so that's something that I kind of learned quickly growing up. But with in U.S. culture, you're very direct. Hey, do you want this? Yes or no, right? Hey, do you want to do this, or what do you think about this? But communicating in Afghan culture, it's more so indirect, and you kind of beat around the bush before you get to the point. So let's say I need something from Sophia, right? But I haven't spoken to Sophia in a while. I'd say, "Hey, Sophia, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. How are things? How's the family? How are the kids? Like, how's work and stuff been going?" You'll have like a little bit of informal conversation, and then you'll get to the point, right? So, I'm happy to hear you're doing well. Like, Sophie, I wanted to reach out to you because I had a question about this and I was hoping you could help me, or, I need this. So I was wondering if you could put me to the right resources. So Afghans, the ones arriving, won't directly be talking, directly. They'll probably have informal dialogue or a conversation first before getting to the point of what they might need. Um, and the same goes with tarafing, especially with kids or with adults. Tarafing, as it's called, like being too polite. So sometimes you'll see, like, if you offer an Afghan, like, hey, you want to, for example, you want this soda, and they're like, no, it's okay, don't worry. You should insist at least two more times, right? And if they don't take it, then that means they don't want it, you're fine. But then if they do take it, that means they actually did want it, and they just wanted to be polite and not seem like they're greedy or not seem that they want too many things. And at the same time, um, in Afghan culture, when someone offers you something, and if they're holding their hand out for too long, it's seen as like inappropriate. So you have to take it. Like, for example, right? If I'm offering you like this glass, it's my pencil cup, but let's say it's like a glass of a delicious drink, right? You say, hey, this is for you, I made it. And then they're like, no, don't worry, don't worry. They'll see that you've been holding it for a while. They're like, okay, she's been holding it for a while, he's been holding it for a while. I don't want to cause them undue burden or pain, so I'll take whatever it is. So don't be afraid to insist with them, especially like more than once. It's because that way they'll understand that, oh, okay, you're kind of familiar with their customs. So they know that you're insist, which means you're familiar with their custom, and you want them to have what it is, and they're going to be more inclined to take it, especially if it's sweets or, things that they get, snacks, food, dinner, and things like that. So um, I also did want to say, in regards to eye contact, what Sophia was talking about, the reason eye contact is kind of inappropriate with Afghans at first is because usually when you're making eye contact with someone, that means you're accusing them of something, or you're having a very serious conversation, or you're trying to kind of stare them down or threaten them or that type of a thing. So generally, like when people are talking, I mean, eye contact, of course, is okay to establish that, hey, I'm talking to you and my attention is towards you, but just don't maintain it for long periods, right? Like, well, if you're talking, you get your point, and you see they start to respond, people will look down and kind of point with their ear, right? Not point, but put their ear in their direction to see that they're listening. Mm-hmm. Got it. And then come back, make a little eye contact to show that you're still engaged in conversation. And then give your ear again, like, okay, nod, kind of understanding, that type of a thing. So that's generally how people kind of sharing communication. Um, and secondly, I did want to bring up a point about referencing people. So just like eye contact, like pointing fingers like this, I think this is very normal in the United States. In our culture, we'll be like, oh, it's so and so. Look, like we'll point them with the index finger. But even pointing itself is something that can be very accusing, like, oh, look, it's them, they did it, or they're the thief, or they're the bad guy, that type of a thing. So people won't gesture like that, but instead, when referring to someone, let's say you're standing with a group of 4 or 5 people and you want to point to an individual standing, so instead of pointing to them like that, what we'll do is we'll gesture to them with an open hand, like pointing all of your fingers towards them, right? So we'll say, oh, look, Sophia right here, she knows about this, or kind of like also like nodding your head a little bit out of respect. So, and like, Sophia can help you with this, or, it's different to say, if you're giving direction, I think it's okay to point towards a building, towards a park, towards a vehicle. But when you're referencing other people, it's always more polite to reference with an open hand, and fingers pointing towards that individual person. So that's seen as a lot better. And I apologize if I'm going too long. I promise I'll wrap it up. But um, the one thing that I did want to talk about is the thumbs up as well. I think increasingly people are becoming more familiar with the thumbs up because a lot of these people still have Facebook, some sort of social media. So they know that increasingly this represents a like. So when you give someone a thumbs up, that means you like what they're doing or you like what they say. And this isn't the case for everyone, but a lot of the city folk who have access to technology, to social media, they that this might be kind of inappropriate in Afghanistan, but in the U.S. it's like a normal thing. It's a good thing. So they might understand it, but don't automatically assume that they do. Um, and yeah, and of course, with all of these things, as time goes on, people will become more and more accustomed to U.S. culture. They'll be much more integrated, and they'll be more aware of their habits and things that are okay and things that are not okay. But definitely in the beginning, while they're most vulnerable, while they're most aware and or kind of scared, it's important to, like Sophia said, to have these conversations. And I'm happy that um, Sophia talked about the training on conduct will be made by a lot of like the local officials from the mosques or from the masjids, because in a lot of these communities, their religious leaders are held in high esteem and in high regard. So when they hear, their their local mosque or religious authority make a training on, how to conduct yourself when dealing with members of the opposite sex or opposite gender, how to be normalized with an American dress code, with the American system, because a lot of the times, like Sophia talked about modesty, right? It's important to dress kind of modestly around them, but at the same time, when they do go out, they're going to see men in short shorts or women wearing spaghetti straps, and these are things that they're not accustomed to. So I think it's important to have like I'm not saying that when you're talking about it, it's not important, but when they also receive these instructions and kind of like information about the American dress code and system and way of life from like a local religious leader, I think it'll also go a long way in letting them know how things work around here and how to behave and how not to behave. So yeah. I think that's, I was taking notes as you were talking about all these wonderful, truthful things, Sophia. So I just wanted to add a little bit about what I knew and what I had seen. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes, very helpful. I'm so glad you're here, Ibad, with me and with all of us. I want to open it to anybody and everybody. Just to let you know, Ibad, we have not received our families yet. We're
Hmm.
getting allocations, but hopefully they'll be coming soon, any day now. So, any questions, please feel free to, or concerns, or comments from last week and this week. Um, just raise your hand or speak up, actually.
I have a question.
Hmm.
Um, if we are asking someone to follow us, and normally we just like crook our finger, but I know in the Middle East we can't do that. So, but I'm not sure about Afghan. Is there a way to, since we're gonna, we may have some language barriers. Is there a good way to say, hey, kind of follow me with a hand gesture?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Um, I think generally, like the great thing about nonverbal communication is that it can be pretty universal, even across cultures and borders. I would say that if you're gesturing for someone or a group of people to follow you, like instead of pointing towards them and saying like "come here," that type of a thing, making it look like they're in trouble, just like an open hand, like "come this way," right, and then leading the way, right, turning around and making sure that they're following you, but um, leading the way, always smiling, always being kind when you can. That'll go a long way in terms of building trust and building rapport with them. But gesturing more so with an open hand, like everybody, come follow me. We're gonna go this way, and then you can point towards a location or towards a specific place. With your finger to indicate like that exact spot. But when dealing with people, always great to keep an open hand, like pointing them like that, or if you want to make sure that they're following you, telling them to come this way and then moving towards that direction. So I hope that's helpful.
Open hand gestures are always very welcome when you use the full hand. That's what we do a lot in our Pakistani culture too. Instead of using one finger or one thumb or pointing something, just using the full hand like that. Another thing that I was just thinking last time I talked about, once you're closer to your family and you invite them for lunch or dinner, or you go to their houses, we talked a little bit about how to behave. I wanted to mention that in our eastern cultures, including Afghan culture, generally when you sit with somebody, and Afghans might be sitting a lot on floor because the culture is to sit on the floor. People fold their legs underneath them when they sit. You don't spread out your legs and feet because feet are considered unclean. You do not sit with exposing the bottom of your feet towards somebody or pointing your feet towards somebody. So I just want you to know that this is also considered as a sign of disrespect, pointing your feet or exposing your feet towards someone as you start socializing with each other.
I have a question about the avoiding alcohol and foods. Does this go to, and Tamara had pointed out to us that, vanilla extract has alcohol, so that, maybe we should be careful not baking cookies with vanilla extract in them. Would that be offensive?
That's a very good question. So, what I would say is, and I'll refer to Ibath too, what I would say is number one, do not assume that all Afghans are the same level of strictly observant Muslims. Some of them, as they get acclimated to this culture, might end up using the extract with alcohol, and others might never do that. I have been in and I'll give you my example. I have been in US for 27 years now. I still do not use anything with any amount of alcohol in it, including vanilla extract. But I have other friends who would use vanilla extract with alcohol all the time. So, in my opinion, the safest thing is that as they are very new here and they're coming in, we avoid any grocery products with alcohol in it. I don't think they would even know to even check that there is a possibility that vanilla extract might have alcohol in it. And if you look at the grocery list that we send out, vanilla extract is not there. It's not used in a lot of Afghan cookings much. But I would say that when you do grocery, make sure there is no alcohol or pork products in anything. And if there is something, don't buy it. Because they might use it unknowingly, and later on, when they realize that they consumed something with alcohol in it, it might make them feel very, very bad about um, their own level of unknowing. Iba, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add just a little bit. I think it's that's like a very tough question that even like religious scholars like have a hard time with and agreeing, because it's like, look, the whole point of alcohol is like you don't want to become, in a drunk state where you're impaired and unable to control your own actions and your words and things like that. So, hard liquor is a clear thing to stay away from, but and wine and beer and all these things. But when you get to like cooking, right, is it the same thing? Because it just goes in the ingredients, and some people say yes, it's okay. Other scholars say no, like you still want to avoid it. But I think with what Sophia's saying, and I agree with her, it's better to err on the safer side, especially because you never know, once these people become more acclimated and whatnot, they discover that they might be upset, or they might be hurt, that, or they might feel guilty for inadvertently consuming, and something that they weren't aware of, or that type of a thing.
I have an example.
Mhm.
I have a friend who is actually a protection dog trainer, and
Mhm.
he's Muslim. And I invited him over to my parents' house because they had trouble with their large dogs, dogs didn't want them to leave. So he came and he trained in the house and outside the house with their dogs. And as a thank you, my stepfather offered him chili that he had made. And he said, I made some deer chili, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And my friend said, yeah, that'd be very nice. And he took it. And then it occurred to me that Robert had shot a hog, a wild hog. And I said, Robert, what's the chili made of? And he said, well, I used deer and I used some of that wild hog I got. And I was like, no. So with the chili spices, if I hadn't said something right, it would have gone probably unnoticed, but I would have felt horrible because I knew that it was in there. And the same thing with Southern American cooking. Often bacon is used as a flavoring, and it's not even detectable after the dish is prepared, but it's in there.
Yeah. So these are very good points, and I want to remind you one thing which we talked about last time too, that some things are religiously not accepted and others are culturally not accepted. For example, an Afghan woman who covers herself comes here, several of them come here. Some of them will continue to cover themselves for years because they do it religiously. Others who were doing it only for cultural reasons, it's quite possible after a while they will stop covering themselves. So same goes to all these things of use of pork and vanilla, as alcohol and all of that. Sometimes people start using these products which they won't otherwise, religiously speaking, but culturally it's still not accepted. So you will see Muslims who will start eating non halal or non kosher meat when they're outside their home, but culturally it's still not accepted to bring it inside the home.
Right.
Some people will be totally fine with going and playing with the dog in the park, but culturally it's still not accepted to bring the dog home. I personally know many Muslims who would drink alcohol, but still on a common dinner table, you will never see a wine bottle because culturally, even though he drinks it, but culturally it's still not accepted to have the bottle of alcohol there. So I always say are on the side of being more careful and let's not even go in those gray areas and just avoid them till they're
Right.
more comfortable with this culture.
I also have Muslim friends in Iran when I lived there and here who have dogs. They love dogs and um, they quote the Quran as saying that Muhammad himself had encounters with dogs and that he even had contact with the dog saliva in one of the stories and still did not turn away. So it's the interpretation, just like biblical interpretation for us or for Jews, it is varies from imam to priest in Catholic religion. So not all Muslims don't have dogs in their house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's true. We have two questions, Tamara and Rebecca. Tamara, you want to go first?
Yeah, I had a question about the meals. So if they're used to sitting on the ground or with their food out on the floor, if we are, I know as a family they'll eat together, but if they were to invite us or we were to invite them, would we expect to be segregated, or we don't know? Maybe not, because I've been to places where the women were in another room to eat.
Well, I'll tell you how we are preparing for our family, and then I'll refer to Ibad. When we take them out, or if we go in their private spaces, I expect to be segregated. I think and I don't mean they will do that. We don't know what kind of families we are getting. If we have a family who's very educated, who are used to being with other men and women together, it's quite possible we'll be together. But if we are getting a very conservative family and we go to their houses, I think we expect to be segregated. They'll put women in a different space and men in a different space. It's very, very normal. It's done for the ease and comfort. And we are preparing for our family in ways that when we talk to them, when my teams are going to meet with them, women are meeting with the women separately and men are meeting with the men separately, and we're doing that because we're expecting that. Ibad, do you want to add to that before we go to Rebecca?
Yeah, I think honestly, even I don't know myself. That's a tough question because again, it depends on the culture, the people and their way of life and how they grew up. some people would be completely okay being together and sitting at the same table together, and like it's completely normal for them. Others still might shy away from that and want to keep the genders segregated at first. Until then, maybe, you know, you become more acclimated with one another, you become more familiar, and they see that, okay, this is something that is normal here in the United States, or this is something normal with our family, so we'll be more okay kind of opening it up. So I think, like Sophia said, don't automatically assume that it'll be, you know, co-ed, that type of thing. But if it is, great. And if not, maybe that's something that you can work towards with time. Um,
And you should be able to sense it very quickly in the first meeting when you meet with a male husband and the wife, how comfortable they are. You should be able to sense it from their body language actually very in the first 1 hour or so. Let's go to Rebecca. Do you have a question, Rebecca?
Yes, I do. Abdullah, I'm a caseworker, and I've resettled a couple of Afghan families in the past. And they really didn't want beds at all. Do you think Afghans are getting more accustomed to beds now? Or, you know, what do you think we're going to put them in temporary housing first. And the temporary housing is likely to have beds.
Mhm.
But do you think people should be planning to purchase beds for the permanent housing or waiting to see what they want?
That's a great question. I would, again, these things depend on I'll speak from like a personal story. So when I went to Afghanistan in 2018, I saw some family members who were more so well off, and had beds in their home. But then I also saw family members who didn't and preferred to sleep like on a thick blanket with a comforter and then another blanket and a pillow just on the living room floor or like their bedroom floor. It depends on the people. Beds aren't something that a lot of them are accustomed to yet because they haven't seen them. A lot of the people who might come from outside of the city, more so from the rural areas, they don't even know what a bed is, and they don't know how it might work. You know, the same thing with the toilet. From a lot of the rural areas in Afghanistan, and when we were in Quantico, a lot of people, when they first saw toilets, they were like, how do I use the bathroom in this? And you had to kind of teach them and say, this is, you know, you sit on this, or, you know, you use it like this, and then you see this lever, you push it down and it flushes it down. Like a lot of them were even intimidated by that because they're like, I don't know if I'm gonna mess up or whatnot. And but slowly and steadily, you know, they got the hang of it. They started to understand how it works. And I think that beds might be very similar. A lot of them might not understand how beds work, or which might be crazy to say, but because they've never seen them, you know, and they're used to sleeping.
Actually, they're seeing them now. They're seeing them now. They're in the bases and they're sleeping on cots, which is not the same as a bed, but it's, you know.
Well, they may very well be that cot aside. And I want to caution that fact that they may not use or know a toilet or a bed has nothing to do with poverty. It's a Bedouin society that even the most wealthy in Saudi Arabia, in Syria, in Afghanistan, or wherever, choose not to sleep on a bed because it's just culturally not what they've ever done. So don't assume that these people are poor and need, you know, they may very well know how to use a bed, but prefer not to. And we'll push it aside and we'll lay down a blanket because that's what they.
So all those people who are buying stuff, this is so for our temporary housing, we have a big room with carpet in it. So what we are doing at Medina is we are putting thick blankets or thin mattresses on the carpet to make beds for them. That's our temporary housing. We are not purchasing anything for our temporary housing. But for permanent housing, we are buying all the furniture. We have given all the orders already. And in that furniture, we are not buying beds. I believe they already know what beds are. They're using it in the bases. They won't have a problem using them. But I would like to provide them with things that they're comfortable with. I personally don't like beds actually. So what we are buying for them is box springs and mattresses on top of them. So they'll be really high on the floor because there's a box spring and a mattress. But I think that's really nice and they would appreciate it. So I don't see the reason also to spend so much money buying beds when there is no need. However, if you're putting them in a temporary housing which has beds, it's totally fine. They won't have a problem with it. But don't go out of the way to buy beds. That's what I would say.
And also, I think when you're talking about when I left the revolution, and I was petrified for any noise, and I preferred a corner. To this day, 42 years later, I prefer a corner in a restaurant. And for years, I preferred to sleep on the floor in a corner. And I actually slept in my suitcase. And I was raised in a country that had beds, but it was a comfort thing, a safety, a space that allowed me to be surrounded by a wall. And it's hard, it's something you don't really talk about, but it can be very much, for me, sleeping on the floor, sleeping in a corner was because of having been in a war zone, in a revolutionary state. And it took years to be comfortable in a bed that had a space underneath it and was freestanding.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you for sharing your experience. Tamara, do you have another question?
Well, it's actually just a comment. I have one of my bedrooms is entirely, it doesn't have a bed. I went to, I think it was Joann's, and I bought some cushions. And so it's for when people come to stay with me and they would prefer to sleep there. So it's like a cushion, maybe 3 inches, and then blankets. And that's kind of that, and it's easy to get. It's not that expensive just to get so that they feel comfortable sleeping in there.
Yes, then that's a wonderful idea. We can get thick blankets, thin mattresses, or cushions. We're running out of time. If there is any question, please let's take one more question. And like I said, we'll have that resource hour every week, and hopefully it'll be more useful once the families are here. Is there anyone last question, or Ibad, do you have any last comments?
I definitely want to say I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for making time this Saturday to learn more and to help create and cultivate a positive and welcoming atmosphere for a lot of our travelers who will be coming, and our refugee community members. And I'm honored to be a part of this space with you all, and I'm glad that I can be even just a slight resource. So anything that I can do to help, please feel free to ask or to get in contact with me. I believe Sophia has my information, so I'd be more than happy to do what I can. But I'm grateful for you all, because this is definitely a team effort, and this isn't anything that can be done alone. And I know that they'll be very grateful too. My dad, who immigrated here in the 70s, till this day, he still remembers his host family. He always prays for them. He thinks of them fondly. And, my dad's in his 70s now. He came here in the early 70s to study, and his host family was so kind to him, so welcoming, and he'll never forget that. And I know that these travelers who will be arriving, they'll definitely feel the same way about you too. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing your dad's story. I think it's your role in the lives of these Afghan brothers and sisters who are coming is crucial. I want to say two more things before we quick close. If you have some questions in your mind, or if any topics that come to you, for example, we want to talk about media and privacy, which I didn't do it today, we'll do it next time. Please shoot them on the app that we have, so I can add them to the list, and I will send them to Ibad too, so he can start thinking about them before we meet next Saturday. So feel free to make a list of the topics that you want to be addressed next time. And I guess that's about it for today. I would close with the same prayer that I started with last time. which is the Persian Sufi poet of 14th century, that even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look, look what happens with a love like that. It lights up the whole sky. Thank you all for your commitment to the service project, for your heart, for your prayers, for your time. Peace, salam, and shalom.